Cromwell Matthew Arnold synopsis lesson I greater than introduction. The mountains and the sea, the cradles of freedom, contrasted with the birthplace of Cromwell, his childhood and youth, the germs of his future character probably formed during his life of inaction. Cromwell at the moment of his intended embarkation, retrospect of his past life and profligate youth, temptations held out by the prospect of a life of rest in America, how far such rest was allowable, vision of his future life, different persons represented in it, Charles I, Cromwell himself, his victories and maritime glory, Pym, Strafford, Lord Hampton, Falkland, Milton, Charles I, Cromwell on his deathbed, his character, dispersion of the vision, conclusion. Schrecklich ist es, deiner Wahrheitssterblichkeitsgefahr zu sein. V. Schiller, less than / I greater than high fate is theirs, ye sleepless waves, whose ear learns freedom's lesson from your voice of fear, whose spellbound sense from childhood's hour hath known familiar meanings in your mystic tone, sounds of deep import, voices that beguile age of its tears and childhood of its smile, to yearn with speechless impulse to the free and gladsome greetings of the buoyant sea. High fate is theirs, who wear the silent sky, stoops to the soaring mountains, live and die, who scale the cloud-capped in height, or sink to rest in the deep stillness of its sheltering breast, around whose feet the exulting waves have sung, the eternal hills their giant shadows flung. No wonders nursed ye thy childhood, not for thee did the waves chant their song of liberty. Thine was no mountain home, where freedom's form abides enthroned thee amid the mist and storm, and whispers to the listening winds, that swell with solemn cadence round her citadel. These had no sound for thee, that cold calm islet with no rapture as the storm swept by, to mark with shivered crest the reeling wave hide his torn head beneath his sunless cave. Or hear, mid circling crags, the impatient cry of the pent winds, that scream in agony. Yet all high sounds that mountain children hear flash deep from thy soul upon thine inward ear. All freedom's mystic language, storms that roar by hill or wave, the mountain or the shore, all these had stirred thy spirit, and thine eye in common sights read secret sympathy, till all bright thoughts that hills or waves can yield, decked the dull waste, and the familiar field. Or wondrous sounds from tranquil skies were borne far o'er the glistening sheets of windy corn, skies that unbound by clasp of mountain chain, slope stately down, and melt into the plain. Sounds such as erst the lone wayfaring man caught, as he journeyed, from the lips of Pan. Or that mysterious cry, that smote with fear, like sounds from other worlds, the Spartan's ear. While o'er the dusty plain, the murmurous throng of heaven's embattled myriads swept along. Say not such dreams are idle, for the man still toils to perfect what the child began. And thoughts, that were but outlines, time engraves deep on his life. And childhood's baby waves, made rough with care, become the changeful sea, stemmed by the strength of manhood fearlessly. And fleeting thoughts, that on the lonely wild swept o'er the fancy of that heedless child, perchance had quickened with the living truth the cold dull soil of his unfruitful youth. Till, with his daily life, a life, that threw its shadows o'er the future, flowered and grew, with common cares unmingling, and apart, haunting the shrouded chambers of his heart. Till life, unstirred by action, life became threaded and lightened by a track of flame. An inward light, that, with its streaming ray, on the dark current of his changeless day bound all his being with a silver chain like a swift river through a silent plain. High thoughts were his, when by the gleaming flood, with heart new strung, and stern resolve, he stood, where rode the tall dark ships, whose loosened sail all idly fluttered in the eastern gale. High thoughts were his, but memory's glance the while fell on the cherished past with tearful smile, and peaceful joys and gentler thoughts swept by, like summer lightnings o'er a darkened sky. The peace of childhood, and the thoughts that roam, like loving shadows, round that childhood's home. Joys that had come and vanished half unknown, then slowly brightened as the days had flown. Years that were sweet or sad, becalmed or tossed on life's wild waves, the living and the lost. Youth stained with follies, and the thoughts of ill crushed as they rose, by manhood's sterner will. Repentant prayers, that had been strong to save, and the first sorrow, which is childhood's grave. All shapes that haunt remembrance soft and fair, like a green land at sunset, all were there. Eyes that he knew, old faces, unforgot, gazed sadly down on his unrestful lot, and memory's calm clear voice, and mournful eye, chilled every buoyant hope that floated by. Like frozen winds on southern vales that blow from a far land, the children of the snow o'er flowering plain and blossomed meadow fling the cold dull shadow of their icy wing. Then fancy's roving visions, bold and free, a moment dispossessed reality. All airy hopes that idle hearts can frame, like dreams between two sorrows, went and came. Fond hearts that fain would close the unwelcome truth of toilsome manhood in the dreams of youth, to bend in rapture at some idle throne, some lifeless soulless phantom of their own. Some shadowy vision of a tranquil life, of joys unclouded, years unsturdy by strife, of sleep unshadowed by a dream of woe, of many a lawny hill, and streams with silver flow, of giant mountains by the western main, the sunless forest, and the sea-like plain. Those lingering hopes of coward hearts, that still would play the traitor to the steadfast will, one moment's space, perchance, might charm his eye from the stern future, and the years gone by. One moment's space might waft him far away to western shores, the death place of the day might paint the calm, sweet peace, the rest of home, far o'er the pithless waste of laboring foam, peace that recalled his childish hours anew, more calm, more deep, than childhood ever knew. Green happy places like a flowery lea between the barren mountains and the stormy sea. Oh pleasant rest, if once the race were run. Oh happy slumber, if the day were done. Dreams that were sweet at eve, at morn were sin, with cares to conquer, and a goal to win. His were no tranquil years, no languid sleep, no life of dreams, no home beyond the deep, no softening ray, no visions false and wild, no glittering hopes on life's grey distance smiled like isles of sunlight on a mountain's brow, lit by a wandering gleam, we know not how, far on the dim horizon, when the sky with glooming clouds broods dark and heavily. Then his eye slumbered, and the chain was broke that bound his spirit, and his heart awoke. Then like a kingly river swift and strong, the future rolled its gathering tides along. The shout of onset and the shriek of fear smote, like the rush of waters, on his ear. And his eye kindled with the kindling fray, the surging battle and the mailed array. All wondrous deeds the coming days should see, and the long vision of the years to be. Pale phantom hosts, like shadows, faint and far, councils, and armies, and the pomp of war. And one swayed all, who wore a kingly crown, until another rose and smote him down, a form that towered above his brother men. A form he knew, but it was shrouded then. With stern, slow steps unseen yet still the same, by leaguered tower and tented field it came. By Nasby's hill, o'er Marston's heathy waste, by Worcester's field the warrior vision passed. From their deep base, thy beetling cliffs, Dunbar, rang, as he trod them, with the voice of war. The soldier kindled at his words of fire. The statesman quailed before his glance of ire. Worn was his brow with cares no thought could scan, his step was loftier than the steps of man. And the winds told his glory, and the waves sonorous witness to his empire gave. What forms are these, that with complaining sound, and slow, reluctant steps are gathering round? Forms that with him shall tread life's changing stage, cross his lone path, or share his pilgrimage. There, as he gazed, a wondrous band they came, Pym's look of hate, and Strafford's glance of flame. There Laud, with noiseless steps and glittering eye, in priestly garb, a frail old man, went by. His drooping head bowed meekly on his breast. His hands were folded, like a saint addressed. There Hampden bent him o'er his saddle bow, and death as cold dews beamed his earnest brow. Still turned he to watch the battle, still forgot himself, his sufferings, and his country's lot. There Falkland-eyed the strife that would not cease, shook back his tangled locks, and murmured peace. With feet that spurned the ground, lo! Milton there stood like a statue, and his face was fair beyond human beauty, and his eye, that knew not earth, soared upwards to the sky. He, too, was there. It was the princely boy, the child companion of his childish joy. But oh, how changed those death-like features wore childhood's bright glance, and sunny smile no more. That brow so sad, so pale, so full of care, what trace of careless childhood lingered there? What spring of youth in that majestic mien, so sadly calm, so kingly, so serene? No, all was changed. The monarch wept alone, between a ruined church and shattered throne. Friendless and hopeless like a lonely tree, on some bare headland, straining mournfully, that all night long its weary moan doth make to the vexed waters of a mountain lake. Still, as he goes the phantom's mournful glance shook the deep slumber of his death-like trance. Like some forgotten strain that haunts us still, that calm eye followed turn him where he will, till the pale monarch, and the long array, passed like a morning mist, in tears away. Then all his dream was troubled, and his soul thrilled with a dread no slumber could control. On that dark form his eyes had gazed before, nor known it then. But it was veiled no more. In broad clear light the ghastly vision shone, that form was his, those features were his own. The night of terrors, and the day of care, the years of toil, all were written there. Sad faces watched around him, and his breath came faint and feeble in the embrace of death. The gathering tempest, with its voice of fear, his latest loftiest music, smote his ear. That day of boundless hope and promise high, that day that hailed his triumphs, saw him die. Then from those whitening lips, as death drew near, the imprisoning chains fell off, and all was clear like lowering clouds, that at the close of day, bathed in a blaze of sunset, melt away. And with its clear calm tones, that dying prayer cheered all the failing hearts that sorrowed there. A life whose ways no human thought could scan. A life that was not as the life of man. A life that wrote its purpose with a sword, molding itself in action, not in word. Rent with tumultuous thoughts, whose conflict wrung deep through his soul, and chalked his faltering tongue. A heart that recked not of the countless dead that strewed the blood-stained path where empire led. A daring hand, that shrunk not to fulfill the thought that spurred it. And a dauntless will, bold action apparent. And a piercing ken through the dark chambers of the hearts of men, to read each thought, and teach that mastermind the fears and hopes and passions of mankind. All these were thine, no thought of fear. And thou stretched on that bed of death, art nothing now. Then all his vision faded, and his soul sprang from its sleep. And lo, the waters roll once more beneath him, and the fluttering sail, where the dark ships rode proudly, wooed the gale, and the wind murmured round him, and he stood once more alone beside the gleaming flood.